Welcome to the Marxist Workers Party's podcast, Izwi Labasebenzi, bringing reports and analysis of the news from a working class and Marxist perspective, fighting for jobs for all, a 12,500 Rand per month minimum wage and high quality service delivery, organising to arm the workers and trade union movement with a revolutionary socialist and Marxist programme and policy, building the struggle against capitalism and for working class political power and socialism.
Today is the 3rd of November 2020. In this bulletin, we make a Marxist and class analysis of the ANC government's medium-term policy statement. Delivered by Finance Minister Tito Mboweni last week, we asked the question, what program must the working class stand upon to defend its living standards?
Last Wednesday, Finance Minister Tito Mboweni, on behalf of the ANC government, announced the following. 1. The wages of all public sector workers will be frozen for the next 3 years. This will affect teachers, nurses, and other health workers, police officers, and workers in all other government services. This pay freeze comes on top of the pay rise already cancelled by the ANC government. In reality, this new freeze will mean a pay cut. Prices will continue rising and public sector workers' salaries will buy less and less. Number 2, 300 billion rands will be cut from national government departments, provinces, and local government over the next 4 years. The budgets of water and sanitation, schools, clinics, and hospitals, for example, will all suffer. This will have a massive impact on already poor service delivery. Number 3, over the next 4 years, taxes will be increased by 40 billion rand. The details will only be revealed in the February 2021 budget, but we can be certain that they will fall heaviest on the working class and middle class. In other words, the ANC government has prepared a massive assault on the living standards of the poor, the working class, and the middle class. Showing the cruelty of the ruling class, Mboweni cracked jokes and meandered through whimsical asides while delivering his speech, seeming not to care in the slightest about the pain that will be inflicted upon millions.
Mboweni and the government's rhetoric tries to hide the real agenda and the real interests being served by the new spending announcements. The idea of a social compact, where a so-called united society agrees on the necessity for these hard decisions, is nothing but a trap for the working class. The ruling party's top priority is the defense of the capitalist profit system and the protection of the interests of the minority capitalist class. The South African ruling class, the super-rich bosses, and the politicians that serve them have driven their own capitalist economy into the wall. The most immediate danger facing them now is what is known as a sovereign debt crisis or a government debt crisis. Such a crisis happens when a government runs out of money to service and pay back its debts and defaults on these debts. The crisis has been building up for years. Even without the pandemic, the weak world capitalist economy was decisive in a decade of economic stagnation in South Africa. We will deal with this in a future podcast. This, combined with the parasitic tender system, corruption, and state capture, had created a budget deficit of nearly 7% by the start of this year. In other words, for every 100 Rand that the government had committed to spend, it only had 93 Rand in the bank. It found the missing 7 Rand by borrowing it. The lockdown worsened this deficit massively. It is now nearly 16%. So 16 Rand is borrowed for every 100 Rand that government spends. This means borrowing 2.1 billion Rand every single day. As a result, Total government debt is skyrocketing. 4 trillion rand in total is now owed, the equivalent of 2 years of government spending on everything. Mboweni says this will climb to 5.5 trillion in just 4 years. But this money is not borrowed for free. Interest is charged on it. How much the government has to pay is determined largely by the global money markets, the international capitalist mashonisas. They are charging the government 9% interest. So to borrow is daily 2.1 billion rand. The government agrees to add 190 million rand when it pays back the money. Just paying this interest now accounts for 5% of all government spending. And this proportion is going up and up. Next year, the government will spend more on interest payments than it does on health care. The public sector wage freeze, the huge budget cuts, and the tax increases announced by Mboweni are to ensure that the local and international capitalist mashonisas get this interest, their profits. In class terms, the medium-term budget policy statement is the ANC government's declaration that the working class and middle class will be sacrificed to defend the profits of finance capital. The ANC government is a willing debt collector. For example, in the June supplementary budget, Mboweni proposed spending cuts equivalent to 7% of the economy. It was pointed out to him that even the worst so-called IMF structural adjustment programs usually only demand cuts of 4%. He has now reluctantly slowed down.
Carrying out this attack and managing the class conflict it will provoke, it is a delicate task for the South African ruling class. As always, they will use the weapon of divide and rule. Mboweni's speech tried to turn different sections of the working class against each other and to turn the middle class against the working class. The bourgeois media is cooperating fully with this agenda. A massive propaganda campaign is underway against public sector workers. They are being portrayed as lazy, pampered, and overpaid. Working class and middle class taxpayers are being encouraged to blame public sector workers for the tax burden they face, rather than widespread corruption and the predatory behavior of the capitalist mashonisas. But by the government's own calculation, 30 to 40% of the government's budget is lost to corruption every year through inflated tenders and the non-delivery of services. The recent PPE corruption scandal is, in reality, routine practice under ANC rule. Mboweni, trying to score points in the ANC's factional struggle, announced cuts to police, schooling, and healthcare to fund, so he says, South African Airways. Presenting it in this way was a political choice, calculated to further undermine public support for SAA workers. A price tag could just as easily be attached to the profits made by tenderpreneurs in each department to explain where money for jobs and services is really going. Instead, working class communities are encouraged to blame SAA workers for the lack of police, teachers, and nurses. The working class must reject every attempt by the ANC government and its ministers to turn workers against each other. To their divide and rule, we must respond with class unity.
The ground has been prepared for a massive escalation in class struggle in the coming months and years. The cuts to services will lead to a further increase in community struggles and service delivery protests. Already, as pointed out before, there has been an increase from an average of 2 protests per day before the pandemic to 8 per day in July, when the latest figures were published. A number of media commentators with an eye on the recent uprisings in Nigeria and Mali are warning, again, of civil unrest. This is why the social relief of distress grant has again been extended to the end of January. Its withdrawal is already a political headache for the ruling class against the background of a massive increase in unemployment and poverty. Public sector workers are furious. Until now, the COSATU leadership in particular has done everything possible to hold workers back from a full-blown public sector general strike. In December, the Labour Court of Appeal will rule on the lawfulness of this year's cancelled pay rise. Even if the ruling goes in favour of the workers, the 3-year wage freeze still poses the need for strike action. The ANC's attack on public sector workers has also called back into question, with a new ferocity, COSATU's support for the ANC through the tripartite alliance. Socialists and Marxists must continue to campaign in the trade unions for a public sector general strike and to prise open all the political contradictions of trade union support for a capitalist government. We say, workers, take COSATU out of the tripartite alliance.
On the basis of capitalism, the poor and working class will be made to pay for the crisis of capitalism. The working class and trade union movement must be armed with a program that boldly puts forward the need to break with capitalism. The burning question is, what should be done about the government's debt? This cannot be approached as a technical exercise. It should not be the role of trade union leaders to write policies advising the ANC government and capitalist state on how to balance the country's books and grow the capitalist economy. They should certainly not be offering workers' savings in the government employees' pension fund to pay off the debt of state-owned enterprises like Eskom. The foundation for the now massive debt was created from the onset of ANC rule. Even before they were elected, they agreed to borrow money from the IMF to pay off the apartheid regime's debt. After adopting the neoliberal gear policy in 1996, they took this further. They reduced corporate tax from 44% to 28%, donating billions to their capitalist masters. They relaxed exchange control regulations, allowing big business to take billions out of the country legally every year. As a result, South Africa is thought to lose $10 to $25 billion every year in so-called illicit flows. The debt is a political question in the class struggle. Its solution demands an independent working class approach. It is time to raise the following slogan: the working class refuses to pay the debt of this anti-working class ANC government and its corrupt politicians. Around 70% of government's debt is owed to local capitalists, the major banks, big businesses, and various investment funds. As a first step, the banking and financial sector should be nationalized and placed under the democratic control of the working class. On this basis, the interest payments on government debt could be abolished and a true determination made about the financial position of the economy as a whole. Nationalization should be extended to the mines, the big commercial farms, construction, manufacturing, telecommunications, the big wholesalers, retailers, and distributors. On this basis, the capitalist distinction between debtor and creditor, only possible on the basis of a capitalist economy parceled up by private ownership, could be ended. In its place, the socialist planning of society's resources, wherever they originate, would ensure all basic needs are met and living standards raised. The 30% of government's debt held by overseas capitalists requires additional socialist policies. These capitalists would rush to pull their money out of South Africa, provoking an economic and currency crisis. To combat this sabotage, the state monopoly on foreign trade alongside capital and price control will be necessary. These must be under the democratic control of elected committees of working class representatives. Capitalist governments around the world would immediately move to punish South African working class. The response must be an internationalist policy appealing to working class solidarity and action to tie the hands of the ruling class.
Every political party takes it for granted that the debt must be paid. To those parties that posture as radical, left, or even socialist, the question must be put to them: should the debt be paid? The same question must be posed to the leaders of the trade unions. This one question can expose which side of the class barricades they will stand in the class struggles that lie ahead. There are important lessons from the 2015 Greek sovereign debt crisis. In words, the left party, Syriza, opposed the working class being made to pay for the crisis. But when swept into power by the working class, they refused to repudiate the debt, let alone break with capitalism. Ultimately, indeed, they sided with the European capitalist classes and refused to lead a struggle. The Greek working class living standards plunged and have never recovered. This is why the need to build a socialist mass workers' party is more urgent than ever. All the above socialist measures require a political vehicle that is capable of forming a workers' government. COSATU must break with the ANC now. SAFTU must reconvene the Working Class Summit and implement the resolutions taken by both in favor of creating a mass workers' party. The foundations for this must be laid now, and they must be laid urgently. The 2021 local government elections are fast approaching. In his speech, Mboweni made it clear that he will pass the axe to cut spending to local politicians, letting them decide what to cut and how. Just as the ANC is a willing debt collector for the capitalist class, we can guarantee that all the parties in parliament, province and local government will swing the axe with little complaint. Let us seize the opportunity of the 2021 local government elections to campaign in communities against the ANC government's spending cuts and popularize a socialist alternative.
If you have any questions or comments about the contents of this bulletin, please let us know and we may try and respond in future bulletins. Also, if you know about or are involved in any struggles that you would like us to report on, or have any suggestions for future topics that you would like us to cover, please contact us. Our contact details will be provided at the end. The Marxist Workers Party is an affiliate of the Committee for a Workers' International, the CWI, building global working class unity in the struggle for a socialist South Africa, a socialist Africa and a socialist world. If you would like to join the Marxist Workers Party or find out more about us, including building the CWI in Southern Africa, please visit our website at www.marxistworkersparty.org.za or call or WhatsApp us on 081 366 7375.